Ooh, sorry this took a hot moment for me to get ready. The cats, your TAs, are, brooding around in the box spring on my bed, so I'm just hoping that they don't disrupt too much as I lecture. The cats are acting up, so I'm sorry in advance if they, don't act cute for you this lecture. Okay. Oh, here, let me turn this on Do Not Disturb. Boop, boop, boop. Good morning. I hope you're all doing well this morning. Boop, boop, boop. If you're in the live stream, feel free to say it back. I see that our channel has reached a record high of 9 subscribers, so that's really interesting. In the words of Toby from Wellness, don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't actually like this video. If it blew up, I would be really concerned. Okay. Today we're talking about causal inference, and we're finally bringing back last week on Intro to Epidemiology. Last week you learned how to measure associations. You might remember this slide from heart disease affects more people, but the association between smoking and lung cancer is stronger. And you learned how to calculate this. You learned how to measure associations. Now we're going to be talking about, I didn't put in the, that's a lie. It's not recorded. I just made the little graphic on Canva. I should have dragged the graphic on Canva in. My sincere apologies. This is not lecture 4 and it's also not recorded. I just didn't change that from last semester. But we are learning about causal inference. So once we know that an association is strong, how do we know if it's causal? Basically is what we'll be talking about today. Our learning objectives are to differentiate between real and spurious associations in research. I probably won't overlap with what you've learned in 303 Kines majors. To examine the types of causal relationships, to determine or how to determine whether a relationship is causal using defined criteria, and to name and give an example for Hill's criteria for causation. In fact, on your homework, you'll give me 6. Okay. Oh, my cat wants to leave. Gotta let the cat out. Hey. Oh, do you both want to go? Go ahead. Go ahead. There you go. Okay, no more cat-based disruptions for the rest of the lecture. So in descriptive epi, we're concerned with showing the world how it is. We've talked about kind of measures of disease frequency, how to tell the prevalence or incidence of something, how to measure the burden of disease. And then we stepped into analytic epi, which is concerned with understanding causality or why the world is the way that it is. We started in analytic epi last week looking at the associations between exposures and outcomes. And we found that smoking and lung cancer, for example, are very strongly associated. But if I say that smoking causes lung cancer, what does that mean? And that's what we'll be talking about today. The aim in analytic epi is the notion of causality or causal inference. At the heart, we're trying to find out if there is a causal association. Because if we show that, if we find the cause of something, or can argue that something causes something, what can we do on an intervention level, right? We can protect and control. Then we have the means to say, oh, if this causes that, we can prevent disease by changing exactly what that exposure is, or mitigate the impacts of an exposure by intervening between the people who've had this exposure. We need to screen them extra, do secondary prevention, A, B, and C. And that can then occur if we know a causal association rather than a mere reaction to public health crises. Probably in recent history, you've seen some mere reactions to public health crises, which do work, but don't ultimately prevent burden of disease, the death associated. Okay, so this lecture is entitled Causal Inference, but you might not know what that is. You probably know what a cause is, but probably not a lot about causal inference. A conclusion about the presence of a health-related state or events and reasons for its existence. And causal inferences provide a scientific basis for medical and public health action. Your book chapter on this, it doesn't cover everything I'm going to go over in lecture, but I actually do really like it. And they say that doctoral students will take advanced classes in causal inference, which in fact I do. Causal inference methods, how do we find it statistically, quasi-experimental design, can we look at policies as causes? So if this is interesting to you at all, I mean, if this entire class is interesting to you at all, we can talk about how to tap into that more in your futures. But causal inference is then determined through rigorous scientific process that involves conducting multiple research studies and making a decision based on the available evidence. Let's take an example, and this is a way that you might be able to link. I've just prepared your final. We'll talk about the final culminating project today, but have these ideas in your head as you look over the topics. Let's go over an example. Let's take your Uncle Bob. You probably don't have a literal Uncle Bob, and you probably wouldn't say this verbatim, but there are people in your life who probably believe this, and if there aren't people in your life, there are people in the narrative of the book we're reading. Uncle Bob said that my mom smoked during pregnancy. No one knew the health dangers back then, and I'm just fine. All of these warnings about smoking during pregnancy are overdone. Do you think we have enough evidence to say then that smoking does not cause negative pregnancy-related outcomes? If one person smoked in pregnancy with no adverse consequences for their offspring, can we conclude that smoking in pregnancy is not harmful? This is just to get your gears turning about exactly how much evidence we need and the quality of that evidence to really feel like something is a cause of something. And how would we explore that? Epidemiologists understand disease causation to be a multifactorial process. That means that there are a lot of different things that go into it. Our steps to exploring causation are: one, to determine whether there is an association, which you learned how to do last week. And then, if an association is demonstrated, to further evaluate the observed association using more rigorous methods. We'll talk about some of the more rigorous, quote-unquote rigorous, study designs in our next unit. But we have to go over this and kind of why we do those, what warrants the use of those study designs today. From your book, I just said that causation is a multifactorial process. These are the three tenets of human disease causality. The first is that a statement basically saying that it is a multifactorial process. All cases of disease have multiple causes. The second tenet is that not all causes act at the same time. You can accrue those over the life course, and we'll see a good graphic depiction of that toward the end of this lecture. And three, that there are many different collections of exposures, that taken together can cause a case of disease. It's not always just obesity, poor diet, low physical activity. It's not always just that. And reducing it to that, I think, can end up being quite a harmful thing in terms of how we limit ourselves, how we limit our imaginations in terms of intervention. So those are your three tenets of human disease causality. Let's take another example. Again, going over the multiple causes. Oh, one of my cats wants back in. I'm not going to let him back in. Let's take one man's depression. He is depressed. His personal history is that he was born in Boise, Idaho in 1965, that his parents are in the working class, so low to middle socioeconomic position. He's the youngest of 5 children, so battling for attention in this household, ostensibly. Got in trouble with the law growing up, and was married at 25 and divorced 4 years ago, and lost his job 2 years ago. Kind of a lot of bummer of stuff that all could feasibly contribute to depression. But would the depression have occurred if we kept everything about his life the same but changed one detail? What could you say if everything about the man stayed the same, but he didn't lose his job? Would the depression have occurred? What about if everything about the man had stayed the same, but the divorce had not occurred? Then would the depression have occurred? What about if everything about the man had stayed the same, but his parents had more resources in his childhood? Would the depression have occurred? That could tell us different things about the nature of these different, which things might be causes, and the nature of those causes. Let's take another example. And this is called Jimmy's counterfactual. I'll tell you what a counterfactual is just momentarily. Consider Jimmy, who is driving his car on the freeway. Jimmy gets a text message, so he picks up his phone to read it. We don't like distracted driving, but Jimmy is, and he nearly immediately gets into an accident. We might ask, did reading the text message cause Jimmy's accident? In line with how we just phrased our inquiry about the man's depression, what are we really asking when we ask this question? What we're really asking is, what if Jimmy hadn't read the text message? Would he nonetheless still have gotten into the accident? Now, can we know this? We only have the one true universe where he did read the text message and did get into the accident. We don't have this second kind of scenario. So we call it a potential outcome or a counterfactual. Now, because the book is on my mind, I'm going to stop for a second and talk to you about the book. There's a scene when Elizabeth she goes to the Bean, or Cloud Gate. They're in Chicago and she goes to the Bean with Dr. Sanborn. And he talks about how he's coming out of retirement and he's doing an ethnographic study about people that believe that the world is a simulation. And he explains, just stay with me. And he explains, the power of computers is getting stronger and stronger. We could simulate things very easily. You can imagine a world where computers are strong enough to simulate entire worlds. Like we see metaverses cropping up. Computers will be strong enough to simulate tons and tons of possible worlds. Who's to say that we aren't living in but one of those? I just kind of want to bring up the idea of parallel universes because that's really what counterfactuals are. The counterfactual is the condition that is counter to the fact. Of course, we don't live in these parallel universes and we can't observe them. But perhaps there is another parallel universe, simulated universe. And statistically sometimes, and I won't belabor this point because it's above the parameters of this class, you can simulate them statistically on the population level, not on the individual level. So counterfactual is that other universe where Jimmy didn't check his phone and we can know whether he got into the crash or not. And we can say that a determinant or an associated exposure is a cause if the outcome would not have occurred. If in the counterfactual universe, Jimmy doesn't pick up his phone, doesn't get into an accident, then the text caused the accident. Right? It's a cause then. If in the absence of that determinant holding all other things constant, including time and space, if the outcome would not have occurred. So if an individual is exposed to a certain determinant, that determinant is the cause of the disease for that individual if the same individual would not have developed the disease had the exposure not occurred or occurred differently, i.e. lower dose or different time. Those of you who are a fan of metaphors are really going to like this. You could think about, like I said, every case of disease has multiple causes. You could think of like a bag of marbles. You ever play marbles as a kid? Probably not. Okay, I'm letting the cat in.
Hey.
Okay, we'll see if he says hello to you. Think of a marble set. You played marbles as a kid. Maybe you didn't. Imagine a collection of marbles. There's a picture up there for your reference, if that's confusing. consider each marble to be a component cause. Again, in very few instances is there one cause. Is there the cause? So consider marbles to be a component cause. All the marbles taken together are the causes, but each marble is a component cause. One marble is rarely sufficient to cause disease, but a particular marble set can be a sufficient cause for a disease. Oh, hey. And in line with the tenets from earlier, there can be more than one marble set that becomes a sufficient cause. Oh, he's saying hello. Here, I'm going to hold you up. You're going to say hello. Here's your TA Milo. You're doing so good, buddy. Okay, there you go. There can be more than one marble set that becomes a sufficient cause. In practice, like I said, it's not just going to be obesity, poor diet, whatever you mean by that, and low physical activity. It's not always going to be those 3 marbles for everyone. It could be family history, smoking, poor diet. Right? We'll go over that example. We have a picture of that example. And causes are rooted in counterfactual definition. Each marble is a necessary cause of disease for that particular cause set. But we can't know which, if we take them out and then it didn't happen, then it's not a necessary cause. And we'll go over what I mean by necessary and sufficient, just hold your horses. But it's rooted in the counterfactual that taking them away is consequential in a parallel universe. Okay, thinking more about the marbles. This is just a good depiction of how different combinations of marbles can cause disease or not cause disease. So person 1 and person 2, they have little X's on their bellies. It's a little bit morbid, but let's just imagine that they have diabetes. And person 3 is actually hunky-dory. They no diabetes. But we can look at all the different marbles that each person has. Excuse me, with this key down here. That the first person has obesity, doesn't have preventive care, access to preventive care like screening, for example, or behavioral counseling. They have a family history of diabetes, and they have 20-pack years of smoking. They have diabetes. Person 2 has poor nutritional education. Maybe they don't have poor diet, but they have poor nutritional education. They have diabetes, family history. They have high blood pressure, and they're old. They have diabetes. Now, all 3 of these things with person 3 are causes for these first 2 people, but they don't cause diabetes in person 3. Person 3 has obesity. They have diabetes, family history, just like person 1, and diabetes, family history, just like person 1 and 2. And they have high blood pressure, just like person 2. But for this person, these aren't causal. So that is just your graphical depiction that there could be more than one marble set that becomes a cause for someone, and that it might not be a cause for someone else. I'm going to complicate this with even more circles. This is the sufficient component cause model. You'll see this more frequently, and I think it's a little bit outdated because we know how rare it is for simply one thing to cause a case of disease. But you'll see this more often. A disease can be caused by any completed pie. So if these chunks weren't so large and they didn't complete the circle, this wouldn't be a case of disease. With a complete circle, we are considering a case of disease, where the pie is comprised of component causes of the disease under investigation. So in our previous example, each one of these things would be a marble, and the person would have an X. And causes which are the only component of a pie are called sufficient causes. So here, I'll just tell you. I could dora you, but I'll just tell you. A is a sufficient cause. Oh, I skipped over this. Causes which are present in every pie are called necessary causes. Now, you'd think that maybe B is a necessary cause. Oh my gosh, my other cat is jailbreaking into my room. You'd think that maybe B is a necessary cause, but actually it's not, because it's not in this pie, right? So it's not present in every single case. So here, there are no necessary causes, and A is a sufficient cause. And then causes which are neither necessary nor sufficient are called component causes. Every single other one of these is a component cause. Technically, A is a component cause too. Let's consider this one because our last example didn't have a necessary component, a component that appears in every pi, but this one does. Which letter is the necessary cause in all three of our pies? I'll let you door with that one. If someone actually wants to put it in the live stream chat, you can, but no worries if not. I'm gonna shut my door because my cat broke in. That's right. Letter A is a necessary component. How do we know? It's in all three of these pies, imagining that these are the only three cases of the disease on the entire planet. A would be the necessary component. Does that make sense? Whew. Okay. Let's go over types of causal relationships. I know that was confusing, so let's go through it more granularly. A necessary cause must be present for the outcome to happen. Like we were saying with those pies. A was present in every single case of the disease. I know that there were only 3, but that's the principle. So the cause must be present for the outcome to happen. And then there's sufficient causes, where if the cause is present, the outcome must occur. Sufficient can also be a collection of causes, right? Each one of these is a sufficient cause. For these people, this was a sufficient cause and this was a sufficient cause. This was not. So, with sufficient cause or causes, if those are present, they must occur. And the outcome can still occur without the cause being present. And causes can be necessary and sufficient. We'll go over examples of all 4 of these. Can be necessary and sufficient, unnecessary but sufficient, necessary but insufficient, and unnecessary and insufficient. And then they're just component causes, right? Let's go over the first. This is pretty rare to see a cause that's necessary and sufficient, where disease never develops without the factor, and the disease always develops in the presence of the factor. Going over a couple causes that are necessary and sufficient. Acid on skin leads to an acid burn. This is very rare, but is necessary and sufficient. You would never get an acid burn, right, without getting acid on your skin. And you would never get acid on your skin and not get burnt by it. That means that acid exposure on your skin is a necessary and sufficient cause to an acid burn. Now, we used to believe that HIV infection was a necessary and sufficient cause of AIDS, that HIV infection would always progress to AIDS. Now we have ART, antiretroviral therapy, where we can intervene and HIV infection can be assuaged, basically. You can be undetectable in HIV and it doesn't always progress to AIDS. But it used to be believed that it was necessary and sufficient, that if A happened, B would happen. See factor A to disease. And another good example is that all individuals with 3 copies of the 21st chromosome, which is trisomy, we call that 3 copies, will evidence Down syndrome. Trisomy 21 is thus sufficient for Down syndrome, and all individuals with Down syndrome have 3 copies of the 21st chromosome. Trisomy 21 is thus necessary for Down syndrome. That is a necessary and sufficient cause. Now, the next type we're going to go over is necessary but not sufficient, where there's a necessary factor but not sufficient in and of itself, and this is common for many infectious diseases. So, multiple factors in the development of tuberculosis, where Mycobacterium tuberculosis is necessary, but not everyone exposed to it will develop disease. Maybe you also need to be tired and immunocompromised and be exposed to Mycobacterium tuberculosis, for example, to be able to then develop tuberculosis. Does that make sense? The third type is sufficient but not necessary, where one factor alone can produce disease, but so can others. For example, high dose radiation exposure or benzene exposure can each produce leukemia. So imagine factor A is high dose radiation exposure, that can produce leukemia. Factor B is benzene exposure, can alone produce leukemia. Without the presence of the other, which is why or is there. But sufficient is rarely met by a single factor. And then finally, there are causal associations which are neither sufficient nor necessary, and this represents most of the causal relationships in chronic diseases. Let's look at that. We talked about how you accrue causes of things over your lifespan. We've also talked about life course epi. So that's what we're looking at here, collecting marbles over the life course. Oh, we don't have the key anymore. But imagine that these are symbolize what they symbolize. Where people can accumulate marbles in utero, first of all, at birth, in adolescence, during young adulthood, at older adulthood, and you can get a lot of things at one point, or slowly over time. So maybe all of these things will contribute to developing diabetes. More happening during adulthood, but a whole bunch of this, of ACEs during infancy, childhood, adolescence, were really consequential as well. And I want you to think about marbles as things that are not independent. Again, we limit ourselves thinking just about marbles as individual risk factors. This is kind of where we link to the social ecological model, just saying that there are factors or causes that happen at levels above the individual and therefore can be shared across individuals. That one person's marble collection might influence another person's marble collection. For example, through person-to-person infectious disease transmission, through an unhealthy food environment, maybe my whole neighborhood shares one marble. Through community violence, again, same thing. Social norms around substance use, and cigarette smoking. For example, adolescents are more likely to begin smoking, and if an influential peer begins smoking, and through policies and laws managing access to quality healthcare. Okay, I'm going to leave up this summary, and I'm going to go potty. I will be right back. Whew, I'm back. Okay, I hope you've taken in this slide. In summary, with our marble analogy, with our component cause, understanding them, individuals can share these causes, share marbles, transmit marbles from one space to another, be given marbles by the same systems. And within each person's space, there remains a complete set of marbles that is necessary to cause disease, and that one person's complete set of marbles might differ from another person's. I might have all the same exposures as you do, and it might be different for me. I might get the disease and you might not. Okay, so this all seems very highfalutin and rooted in parallel universes that we can't understand. So why do we care? At the population level, we need to understand exposure to unhealthy environments and transmission of disease to understand and intervene to prevent these adverse health outcomes. While we don't have parallel universes, we have tons and tons of people with multiple different truths that we can try and make inferences between. Oh my gosh, my cat is so cute. And by identifying marbles that are common across many spaces, we can identify the exposures and environments for intervention and prevention efforts, both on the individual and the population level. So what then are the public health implications? For an individual, each individual set of marbles that cause disease might be unique, with or without overlap across individuals. And each marble was necessary for that person to develop the disease when and how they did. And preventing any one of the marbles could have prevented disease in that individual. So it's always worthwhile to prioritize prevention when we don't know what each person's individual causes are. Why not try and focus on them all? Prevent them all. Or at least communicate the risks and relative importance of each exposure to different people. And then in the population, like I was saying, epidemiologists look for component causes, marbles that are most common across individuals with the disease compared to those without the disease. We've already done that, 2x2 table type stuff, right? To prevent common marbles, to prevent disease in more people. If we want to prevent lung cancer, we know how strongly associated smoking is. That's a marble that's present for a lot of people. How can we focus on that key exposure? And we need to understand exposure to unhealthy environments and transmission of disease to understand and intervene and prevent adverse health outcomes. That's the same thing that we said last slide. Now, I'm going to give you one more kind of disease model with circles that maybe this one makes the most sense to me. That the individual can only do so much. In case you don't know the myth of Sisyphus, I don't know if he did something bad, but he's being punished to roll the same boulder up the same hill every day, and at the end of the day, he has to watch it roll all the way back down again. So sometimes it can feel like a mundane effort. Oh, my cat's in my box spring. Hey. To have to mitigate your own health hazards, especially when, in fact, it is the systems that you live within that escalate causes and make this individually oriented preventive action so much more difficult. I've thrown in a meme. This is the multi-causation disease model, right? Where all these things, you can only mitigate so much, and it will be more or less difficult for you based on how many structural barriers are in place. So who up pushing they boulder. Now, this next part is going to be the most important for your Unit 2 homework. This is Hill's causal criteria. These are not perfect. This homie, Bradford Hill, came up with 9 criteria to try and better understand causality. These are kind of old and imperfect, and we'll go over which are still helpful because some have been completely debunked as useless. But they were never meant to be absolute, nor are they meant to be used as a checklist for disease. It's always been understood that not all criteria will apply in all situations. But if you want to make a causal claim, these are your things to consider. For example, normally we need an RCT, and we'll talk about this when we talk about RCTs, to establish causation because randomization controls for all other factors, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to commit that to memory, but we'll learn that later. But Thinking about smoking and lung cancer. If you can make cases about enough of these things, then it might be a causal relationship. So let's go over it. These are the 9 criteria: temporality, consistency of data, strength of association, dose response, coherence, biological plausibility, analogy, experimental evidence, and specificity of the association. Specificity of the association should be bright red. It's the one that's been debunked. We'll go over that. So the first thing for it to be a causal relationship is temporality. This is the only one that has to be present. This is a necessary component of causality. That in order for an association to be causal, the exposure must come before the outcome. Otherwise, it didn't cause it. They might still be associated, but otherwise it didn't cause it, right? Take, for example, heavy drinking. For which association would it be easier to ascertain for temporality? Heavy drinking and depression, or heavy drinking and liver disease? I'll let you think about this one Dora style before I tell you. That's right. It's easier to ascertain temporality for heavy drinking and liver disease. I might see you at a care checkup in 2024, and I check your liver enzymes, and they're good. And I ask how much you drink, and you're like, socially, I don't binge drink. And then it could be the case that the next day, before you start drinking heavily, that you develop liver disease, but that's highly unlikely. What really would happen is you'd come to me, your doctor, the next year, and you'd say, I've been drinking more, I started binge drinking regularly, and I check your liver enzymes, and you have liver disease. We can say that the drinking probably preceded the liver disease, that you were like, oh, right after we saw each other. Last year I did start drinking, now your liver enzymes are bad. Whereas, for heavy drinking and depression, if you came to me next year and said, yeah, I've been heavy drinking and I have depression, you show those symptoms as well. It could very well be that drinking made you depressed, or you might have been so depressed that you started drinking. It's more likely that you left my office the year previous and became depressed the next day and then started heavy drinking. Right? So it's more difficult to ascertain temporality in that incident. For example, HPV infection often precedes the development of cervical cancer. And we can observe that. You can see, like, the lesions on your cervix. Sorry if that's a big bummer. And then you're at high risk for cervical cancer, and then that can be observed. And we see that relationship temporally. The second causal criteria is the consistency of data. This refers to the reproducibility of results. This is something that's touched on in the novel as well. Very few studies, we'll talk about publication bias down the road, but people love things that are novel, that are new discoveries. But actually, replication, reproducibility, consistency are pretty important in science. So we usually don't get a lot of evidence for consistency of data unless we're comparing across populations. So consistency of data refers to the reproducibility of the results from a research study in different populations and under different situations, or just in the same population, but although that's never done. Replication and consistency increase our confidence the association is not attributable to an error or a fallacy. For example, in several different populations across tons of different countries, we found consistent findings that physical inactivity increases the risk of cardiovascular disease. Now, that association between obesity and cardiovascular disease is not as consistent. Not as consistent. We talked about that and metabolic syndrome. But we do see that with physical inactivity, it increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, though obesity does not mediate that relationship. And we know that from multiple studies from different countries have shown a link between asbestos exposure and mesothelioma. I didn't realize that the research was that rich on this, but it is. And the data are consistent. Counterexample is the relationship between obesity and hypertension. It differs between races. People found that it was true among white populations and went crazy with it, and now we villainize obesity a bunch, but it's not true. It's not the same amongst Black folks, among Asian folks. That same relationship with the BMI criteria that we consider to be obesity are not true. And we went over that in the past. So that shows inconsistent data. And, sorry, I could have put counterexample for the last one as well, but there are inconsistent findings in the association between mobile phone use and brain cancer risk, so we don't think of that as a causal association. It's also not the strongest association, which is our next thing. The strength of the association refers to the strength of the measure of association used in the research study, like a relative risk or odds ratio. Remember? 14. That's a strong association. Like a relative risk or odds ratio. We'll go over what an odds ratio is later. And the stronger that association is, the more unlikely for it to be accounted for entirely by alternative explanations. It still could be. There could be confounders. There could be bias. But if that is so strong, is it really going to account for the whole thing? So a stronger association might indicate causality, but is not always necessary. You can have weak causes. But this is just one of the things to think about. It's more likely that it'll be entirely accounted for by another confounding factor. For example, smoking and lung cancer. Like I said, the relative risk, at least in that one, was 14. The next criteria is dose response. My students last semester had trouble with this, so really put this graph into your mind. This will come up. Dose response refers to exactly what it says. The higher the dose, the more the response, or less dose, less response. Refers to associations between exposure and outcome increasing as the levels of exposure increase. So this is smoking and mortality. For someone who's never smoked, mortality rate is low. But as people smoke a half pack a day, 1 pack a day, 1 to 2 packs a day, 2+ packs a day, their mortality risk increases. And it's not just either they're a never smoker or ever smoker. We see as the dose of smoking goes up, the response in mortality goes up. That's dose response, okay? And for example, pesticide exposure. Pesticide exposure can range from not being symptomatic. You could be on a farm, driving by a farm and be exposed to pesticides. You could eat a strawberry without washing it, be exposed to pesticides, and not be symptomatic, to causing death. If you are on the field when the plane goes over, you will die. It just depends how high your exposure to pesticides is, right? And then here's cigarette smoking and death, like I pointed out on this graph. So make sure you know this one. This is a really important principle just in general in epidemiological research, is the principle of dose response, not just as a causal criteria, though it is one. Coherence, and this is different than consistency of data. Coherence refers to the fact that the new data should support current knowledge, and if it's inconsistent, you'd want to unpack that. For example, a new discovery of how HIV attacks T cells is coherent with the clinical progression of AIDS. Incoherent findings, there's always a discussion section in scientific articles for a reason. Stuff has to be discussed, and people do reviews, systematic reviews, where you look at the entire literature on one association. And you can see if in fact the data are consistent, if newer findings are coherent with older findings. But different from consistency of data, okay? Biological plausibility. I like it because it's just, is it plausible? But it has to have a biological grounds, and I'm not a microbiologist, I'm not a biologist really at all. But people in the wet lab are always looking for biological mechanisms to explain a causal relationship between an exposure and outcome. So it refers to being a biological mechanism by which the exposure leads to the disease. However, there are many cases where causality has been determined in the absence of a known biological mechanism. Sometimes we can't get the data of what is exactly changing in your body. Maybe you can find it in cadavers, but then can you witness that change within the human body while it's happening? Maybe, maybe not. Some examples are that researchers discovered carcinogenic substances in cigarette smoke many years after the initial epidemiological studies linking smoking to cancer. And these are some more kinesiology related ones, diet related ones, is that you can see the biological, what is happening in terms of sugar intake, making your pancreas produce a bunch of insulin, and then insulin resistance leads to type 2 diabetes. That's biologically plausible. We know that excess sugar intake without fiber can cause type 2 diabetes through this biologically plausible thing. Same with cholesterol. We see how cholesterol increases atherosclerosis, which causes CVD. It's biologically plausible that high cholesterol causes CVD. Counterexamples, vaccines and autism. The people got. There's a whole bunch of lore about that, and the doctor who originally claimed this, I think, not only got his medical license stripped from him, but also possibly went to prison. So, yeah, this is not a causal link. This is a counterexample to biological plausibility. 7 is analogy. This is doesn't make sense. Basically, using previous evidence of a similar association as a basis for causation. This is a weak one. For example, given that several types of viruses cause cancer, like HPV causes cervical cancer, we might believe that another virus is also carcinogenic. Or, what we know about lead poisoning from lead in paint, and what it causes, might also apply to lead in water. Again, this is a weak one. 8 is experimental evidence. We will have an entire lecture down the road on randomized controlled trials, but this refers to research studies being conducted, especially experimental studies where they control for all the things that they hypothesize to be confounders that show that if you alter the cause, that it impacts the disease outcome. They isolate the exposure, essentially, so that it's the only thing that's changed. And as an example, randomized controlled trials have shown that certain blood pressure medications reduce the risk of heart attacks. Now, specificity of the association, and in bright red italics, I have that this has been refuted many times and is not necessary, but originally Bradford Hill posited that they had to be specific, that one exposure causes one specific disease, which we know is not true. Smoking is not only a cause of lung cancer, but also liver cancer, colorectal cancer, COPD, among others. I'm a violence researcher. I look at violence as an exposure, and that's associated with a whole bunch of negative health sequelae, not just poor mental health. So specificity of the association, boo, we don't like it. I don't want to ever see, on your homework or on an exam, an example of specificity. I only want to see counterexamples, okay? Because it's been refuted. So, last slide for this lecture, I promise. How would we determine causality in epidemiology? I'll tell you next unit. This is from your book. Remember, I like this. But we'll discuss epidemiological research and study design in our next unit. But, to answer the question in short, we would conduct research at different levels. Okay. I'm not going to go do the word puzzles today, but I will still take questions because we're going to use our tacked on time at the end to go over a few things. The first is that, I haven't posted the example. It's done, so I'm going to post it and post the assignment. Is your final culminating project? It's time, okay? It's due in a month. A month and a week. So final projects are due May 9th. Early planning is strongly encouraged, which is part of this. And an example, sorry, it's not posted yet, but it will be posted. I've also commented on it, in Word, commented some things to point out good practices, bad practices, things I like to see. The main focus of your project is to connect the book that you've been reading all semester long, and I know that every single one of you has, finished the book, Wellness, which explores health and research, with the course material by applying your knowledge of epidemiology. Final papers must be tailored for readers unfamiliar with the book. I know what it looks like when someone tries to give me a SparkNotes summary of a book. You have to go deep enough in this paper to show me that you've read the book and understand it deeply. And you have to present it in such a way that the reader is familiar with the background of the book enough to understand your argument. So they should contain an overview of the novel that supports your argument, demonstrating an in-depth understanding of the narrative. Again, look to the example to see how that can be done. Your essay must include at least 3 quotes from the book. In the example, I definitely include more than 3 quotes, but you can also incorporate things from the book without quoting them. See example on how to do that. And 5 scientific references. You have to prepare these. Most of the work, honestly, comes through the proposal. We'll talk about the proposal. But you'll have these already. My suggestion, okay, if you haven't picked up this book yet at all, and you're like shitting your pants right now, my suggestion is that you get the audiobook, listen to the audiobook as quickly as possible, and then in preparing for your proposal, check out the book, find the quotes, or it's posted on Canvas tentatively until they come for me. And you can Control F and try and find like the tidbits. Like I wrote about PTSD and I was like, oh, there's a really good quote about PTSD in the book. I Control F'd in the ebook to find it. Okay. So hopefully, you have to get these 3 quotes from the book and 5 scientific references for your proposal. So hopefully that front loads a whole bunch of the work. You are entitled or like allowed to add things between. Like I found a whole bunch more relevant quotes as I was finishing the book. Again, but most of it will be done by your proposal because you have to do this for your proposal. Essay should have a minimum of 2,000 words. And be submitted in a standard 12-point font, double space. This formatting typically results in 7 to 10 pages. I don't care about page count. You don't have to bullshit me on page count. What you can't bullshit me on is 2,000 words. I'm gonna look at your thing and scan it and do the word count. You gotta give me 2,000 words because the university requires it, okay? I can't pass you if you don't do the writing. 2,000 words. And that's not including your reference page or your title page. That's the body of the paper. It has to be 2,000 words. My example is like barely 2,000 words. I will tell you that. All essays must adhere to APA 7 formatting guidelines and include a references page. See my example for what I want. I want some in-text citations. I do want a title page. And I do want a reference page. And I want a double space, like I said. Select a topic from the provided list, which is posted, or if you prefer an alternative topic that meets the objectives, that you feel like you can really get 2,000 words connecting to epidemiology and population health, you can propose it to me, send me an email. I need to have it written because I forget things. But you can propose it to me and proceed if I approve it. I really inspire you to start now. I think this could be a really strong piece of writing. I saw that Cal State San Marcos was giving out like cash prizes. You could submit a piece of writing that you're proud of to the library, and they were like giving out $500 for the good ones. If you want to turn this into a strong writing sample, like I know at the beginning of the quarter I said this as well, like to apply to grad school, some of you are going to need a writing sample. This would be a great one. I hope you really take the month that you have and the connection to this book and develop a strong essay, incorporate good scientific literature, show a higher level of thinking. That's my hope. This is also my first time assigning this as the final, so I will say, too, there is potential for extra credit on this. You can also send me drafts ahead of time or run ideas by me. I'm happy to workshop this with you because I want this to be something that you are proud of, not just something that ticks the box for this course, okay? I really mean that. And it's 125 points. I know on the syllabus it says it's 150 points because the proposal is the last 25 points. And the rubric for the final project is also posted on the topic sheet. It is basically all the things that I say here, just with point values assigned, okay? Now, you're probably like, Marina, that's due on May 9th. Why do I care? I'm not going to start that until the day before. Lies. You have to propose your project to me by April 11th. Now, already, the example for the proposal has been posted. So see the example, and I just deleted stuff from my example to make a template embedded within the assignment. So when you click on the assignment page, you can see the links to both. No, you can't pick the topic from the example. You can't write the same thing that I wrote. You can't write the same thing that I wrote. And you get 25 points for this example. It is an annotated bibliography, basically. So you have to find your quotes from the book and find your scientific references. You don't have to use all of them, or you can find more between your proposal and your paper, but you have to give me 3 and 5 for this proposal, okay? And that's worth 25 points. And the topics are posted. I think I came up with almost 40. You could propose a different one to me if you want. Like I said, I want you to write in line with your interests. There are not just Kines majors in this class. On my online section, I have like the widest diversity of majors I've ever taught to. So try and find something that is in line with your interests. There's like principles of like marketing and tons of different things, and psychology and A, B, and C. So if you feel like a topic of interest isn't proposed to you, let's chat about it, and I want to find something that's interesting to you that you can meet this assignment with while linking the book to course content. Yeah, the rubric is in the topic sheet. But yeah, 40 different topics-ish you can pick from. Feel free to email me if you want to chat with me about anything. And I can give you certain tidbits, like those of you who are in activity when I started bringing it up. Like, I have tidbits for, like, the marshmallow apple turnover one. There are things that I'd maybe like to see for different topics. So if you're like, hey, I'm interested in this one, help me kick it off, I'm happy to do that. Just reach out. Now, I think it would be bad faith for me to kick you off on this project without... There were a few things that I saw on your Unit 1 homeworks that just blanket statement I want to improve. I want you to come out of this class better writers than you were coming into it, so I think the best way to do that is to... You all got fine grades on your Unit 1 homeworks, but instead of inspiring fear, just to give the entire class some advice on blanket things that I saw crop up too often. The first writing tip: you have to cite knowledge. Every claim, especially broad or general ones, needs to be supported by credible evidence. Especially if you're making big stereotypes. You might have gotten a comment that's like sweeping generalization warrants citation, or like yes but needs to be cited, and it's even things that I agree with. Like if you're saying healthcare providers treat people of color differently, especially black people, true, but you need to cite it. Avoid sweeping generalizations, making big stereotypes about populations of people that there are counter examples to. And refer back to our slides on how to search for and interpret scientific articles. If you're like, oh, I don't know if this article is in fact saying this thing that I think is true. So cite your knowledge. I'm also happy to help you search the literature for articles that say things. Just let me know. Second is to avoid second person. So remember, first person is like writing about me, like I, Marina, am doing A, B, and C. That's my first person. Second person is like you go to the store, when you go to the doctor, you get diabetes when you don't eat well. And third person is like omniscient. One might do this. We prefer third person. But definitely avoid second person. Write scientifically, aiming to be formal and unbiased. It's not true that we're all objective, but we were aiming to be formal and unbiased. So using second person, saying you or your, can introduce subjectivity and imply direct conversation with the reader, which is less formal and less objective. It also creates ambiguity about who you refers to. Like me, when I go to the doctor, I'm grading some of your papers in second person. I'm like, me? So avoid second person. For example, you can change you can observe the reaction rate to one can observe the reaction rate, or the reaction rate can be observed. See how those are third person. So avoid second person. If you got the comment, this sounds like AI. I might not be right, and I just want to say that first and foremost. I'm not trying to create a witch hunt about ChatGPT use. That's not the operative. But if I was right, I invite you to review the syllabus and my stance on the use of AI. I'm pretty generous about it. I am realistic about it. I'm not totally, you can't use it, but there is a line. And if you got that comment and I was right, you've crossed the line. Oh my gosh, someone's revving their motorcycle outside. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about ownership of writing. And if I was wrong, sorry. If I was wrong and you know this in your heart of hearts that I was wrong and that hurt your feelings, I am sorry. But please strategize ways to develop your own voice in writing, because it did sound like AI. On the final, if I detect use of AI beyond what is permitted on the syllabus, I've now baked in points. You didn't lose points on your Unit 1 homework, but you will lose points on your engagement and originality. It's like 6 points out of 125, but still, please don't make me do it. In addition to loss of points for whatever ideas you can't demonstrate in your own words. Okay, so those are my writing tips. Again, I'm also happy to workshop drafts, like, continuously. I always am. So probably not in the 11th hour, but starting now, if you have ideas, like, I'm here with you. It could be a collaborative effort. Oh, I put this at the end? Why did I do that? Wait. Oh, I see what I've done. I accidentally put it over the thing that I needed. So, what did I say on this slide? Wrapping up Unit 2, I think it's that, there's no quiz this week because your Unit 2 homework is due on Thursday. I realize that those of you who have been in activity get way more support on Unit 2 homework than my online folks do, so I decided last night to make you practice problems. You could use these practice problems to, try and do these things on your own and make sure that you are capable of doing so for the final, and or if you are struggling with your Unit 2 homework, which is graded for correctness and you're panicking about that, open up the key of the practice problems. You can see exactly what I did, what numbers I put where. It's different health outcomes and different numbers, but the problems are very similar. And exactly what I expect. And how to get the right answer, basically. So if you want some example problems, you can look at the key of the practice problems to help you with the Unit 2 homework. No quiz. Practice problems posted. Unit 2 homework is due on Thursday. And no late work for Unit 2 homework will be accepted past next Tuesday. Again, your 48 hours extends to Saturday at 5, and then I think I'm going to try and grade them all on Sunday. So that's about it. And that's Unit 2. I think I'll go over I'll spend some time next week going over frequently missed quiz problems. I know that a lot of people are freaking out about quiz 7. I know it's hard. There's also problems on the practice problems that look like the 2 math problems on the quiz, okay? So you can look at that too. Okay, that's it. I hope you all have a great day. Some of you I'll see you on Thursday. To the rest of you, I'm available over email. Okay, bye-bye.